some of the creativity that we're going to experience in a world post AI, post scarcity, whatever, will be one of like community building and experience sort of shaping.
Hello, this is the Free Art School where we talk about things you learn the hard way living as an artist. And today I get to talk to Chris Wiley, artist, also writer. We're going to talk about the path forward and, everything else. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how's it going? Happy to be on.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
delighted. How'd you find your way to the arts? Do you have any family background familiar, or
Right.
what's
Yeah.
your
I
family
mean, that was
like?
one that sort of stuck out for me in a way. And the answer is that I had nobody in my family who had a background in the arts. And in fact, like, I still think that my family are like confused by the art world
Yeah,
in general. Um, my mom did go to like interior design school, but was never a practicing interior designer.
Hmm.
So she has like an aesthetic sense in a way.
Oh, it's where you get the genes.
Possibly, yeah. But my dad was a mathematician and a mathematics educator who I think he would not be upset about me saying barely has an aesthetic bone in his body. Which is not to say he doesn't have like preferences. He's not interested in like any element of culture that would be said to have an aesthetic except for like science fiction and fantasy and like video games.
Hmm. So how'd you find your way into art making?
I mean, I think that it was first through music, which was like so, I mean, it's like still very like incredibly important to me, but was like really important as it is for like basically all teenagers in like forming my like sort of pre-adolescent identity. And like there was an understanding that like here is a way to express yourself, right? Or like take all these like muddled feelings that you have like inside and broadcast them out into the world or whatever. And then,
I'm still like that.
yeah, no, it's not a bad thing. But like, uh, you know, I am weird. The fun fact, though, RIP MTV, I am exactly as old as MTV.
Oh,
We were both born on the same day,
wow,
which
indeed.
be dating me in a very specific way. But like thinking about this now, I think I was really influenced not just by music, but by like watching weird music videos and like weird MTV music related sort of content, like I don't know, Liquid Television or some of those like early weirdo things that they were allowed to put on the air because it was just sort of like, fuck it, I don't know. Like we're music television, I guess. Um, and and I think that sort of like segued me into like the creative life. And I had like a grunge band in like
Oh,
middle school.
oh,
And we like kind of sucked, but we were like, all right.
middle school. And you shouldn't, don't judge them. They're
No,
young.
no, I mean, like we were cool as fuck for middle school, say, if I may. But then I think I was inspired in part by like a really amazing photography teacher that I had in seventh grade, I think is
Oh,
when I started, or maybe it was eighth grade.
yeah.
And she was just woman Eileen Hamath Lemonick, who we called Mrs. H.
Mhm.
And she was just like incredible, like a really inspiring teacher and like very inspiring artist who was like a photojournalist. And I mean, I think maybe the main project of her life, but certainly her main project of her life at that time was traveling around the world and photographing blind people, blindness. But she was like a really kind of like hard driving, but very inspiring professor who, among other things, like brought her entire library of photography books, some of which were like obviously valuable, and like put them in our photo lab so we could like paw through them and ruin
Mhm.
them, presumably. And I learned a lot about photography through that. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other sort of like formative experience that I can think of from that time was I remember seeing the Jasper Johns Target piece that's up in MoMA in the
Mhm.
permanent collection. with like I think it's like a face, a dick, and like a nose or something. I don't know, at the top of the target.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember seeing this reproduced in a book in my art class and being like, I have no idea what this like means, but I would really like to become the type of person who knows what this means.
Oh,
Spoiler alert, I still don't
wow.
really know what it means, but like I could say some stuff about Jasper Johns. But I think like the sort of like the evolution of like understanding art sort of goes from like the very pedestrian like what does it mean to like,
Yeah.
does it matter what it means or like is meaning like should meaning be pinned down in that kind of like strictly linguistic sense. Anyway, yeah, so like that, it just sort of set me on my path in that way. The other really most formative experience that I would neglect, I would be remiss not to say, was like, I think in like 10th grade, we did like a French exchange program for like 2 weeks. And I was in this like weird town outside of Paris, this like kind of working class city whose name is escaping me.
Hmm.
And the mother, whose name I wish I could remember,
Hmm.
um, of my host family, was a like middle school, I think English teacher. And she knew that I had an interest in art, and one afternoon offered to drive me to the Pompidou and take me around for the day. And I just like spent maybe like 5 hours at the Pompidou being just like overwhelmed by like this incredible mass of art that I'd never seen before and was like in many ways like totally flummoxing to me, but which was like so incredibly inspiring. And then I remember that she sat in a very large amount of traffic, as I remember, to take me back,
Oh,
and was like extremely patient and like very very generous. Like I wish I could remember her name or have a way to figure it out because I've been wanting to write her a letter to tell her like how formative that experience
oh,
was. But alas, maybe she'll see this podcast. Uh,
yeah.
it's possible. But yeah, I mean that's sort of how I found my way to the arts and I sort of just like pursued the path of photography particularly for fairly seriously, like fairly quickly. And the rest is history, I guess. But
Well, I think I met you in 2011 or so.
that seems accurate. Yeah.
And then you pretty soon after that had a series of traditional gallery shows.
Yeah, that is true.
So you've had that experience, but then, we were doing a pre-taping chat a few weeks ago about what your thoughts are, your thoughts about how things are going to be in the future because we're speaking right now in 2026 and there's a lot going on in the world generally, but the art world is going through a massive change, either a radical change or restructuring. It seems like it's more than just the normal boom and bust cycle, is what people say. And you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are maybe coming around to this realization, but like, I guess the art market correction has now been going on for like 2 years or so.
Mm.
And or like a year and a half maybe. And for listeners who don't really know, like it's been a particularly brutal one. Lots of very established galleries have sort of like lost their shirts and had to close.
Yeah, and
And
we're talking about like primarily New York, but also Los Angeles and other large capitals, small, mid-sized, large
London
commercial
also,
galleries.
yeah.
And then we're going to talk, about the cycle of how, when COVID happened, there was a boom in sales because people who had art buying money were in their homes more. So
Right.
famously
They wanted
20
to
to
change the
2022.
core. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
really think that's actually true. I
Yeah.
think it's people who are like in houses that they are in like not normally, like in their houses in the country or in the Hamptons or wherever that where they are for only like maybe a couple months a year. And they were stuck just like staring at the walls. And I think they wanted a different view. That's part of it. Um,
Yeah.
there was also just a general speculative frenzy in the economy because people were making so much money on assets. and they wanted to sort of shift it around to other places. So there was like, there was a boom in cryptocurrencies, of course, like famously, but also like collectibles, and art, and like all of these kinds of like alternative asset classes,
Do you think,
NFTs, very
yeah, the
crazy.
zero interest rates were part of that story? So people
Yeah,
think.
I mean, I think that absolutely. I think that's like one of the principal parts of that story.
Mhm.
And I think that like going forward, like if we don't see a return to like what they call ZIRP or zero interest rate policy,
Oh,
um, we are not going to see the kind of art market that we had been accustomed to over the past, like, shall we say, 22 years, 25 years, which I think is like sort of we can say that period is kind of like the period that we would think of as like capital C contemporary art. Like obviously there was speculative frenzy around like painters like Basquiat and Julian Schnabel and whoever in like in the 80s. And like maybe we could say that like contemporary art as we know it now began with like the sort of rise of the YBAs, the young British artists, in the late 90s in the UK. But I like to date it at like the beginning of the Frieze Art Fair, which I think was in 2004,
okay.
which was the beginning of the kind of like art fairization of the art world and the art market, which was sort of transitioning then out of a period of like biennialization in the 90s.
Hmm.
And that new sort of like highly financialized contemporary art world that we basically, you and I grew up in, and sort of took as the standard, that I think is either completely vanished or is in the process of dying. There is a feeling that among the more optimistic amongst us, perhaps, that like we're just experiencing a kind of like secular art market correction, like much like many of the corrections that we've experienced in the past.
Like after the financial crisis or
Yeah,
after
like
the,
after the financial crisis, after there was a brief blip in like 2016, 2015, where like, a good number of galleries also went out of business and like people stopped buying the kind of art that was like super popular at the time, like the photography that we were doing, and also
oh yeah.
zombie formalism and post-internet art. And there was a kind of like correction there, but then like quickly kind of like went up afterwards. But all of these corrections are like, for the most part, can be mapped onto fluctuations in interest rate policy, which basically just means like people are capital is less expensive and people are willing to just sort of like roll the dice on alternative assets. But now, like, I feel like there's literally like two problems hampering, not to get like we're definitely going to get a little too far in the weeds about this, but like
Well,
not
it's voluntary. Watching this is voluntary. People can turn it
yeah,
off.
right. You can just shut me, or you can just like rub forward. But like, I think there are a lot of like structural changes in like the world and the markets that have occurred since 2020, that makes it like way less likely that we're going to get back to the kind of like frenzied boom cycle that we've been familiar with over the last, yeah, like 20 years, but particularly like the period from like 2020 to 2023 or so.
Chris, can we talk about your writing, your professional writing life? You write about culture and about the arts and what
Yeah,
it's like.
so I write about photography principally, and then increasingly, I guess, in a sort of expanded universe of culture for the New Yorker, and I have for 10 or more years now. And I also contribute to Aperture a lot recently. I've contributed to a bunch of other art publications. I used to be a contributing editor at Freeze. I may still be on the masthead.
Oh.
But I was an editor at Kaleidoscope for a while.
Mm.
Um, and I also worked as a curator. I think before, sort of like around the time we met, I was working a lot with Massimiliano Gioni
Mm. Mm.
shows at the New Museum, but then also like big biennial exhibitions like the Guangzhou Biennale and the Venice Biennale in sort of 2010 and 2012 respectively. Yeah, so that's sort of like that was also a big part of me getting like into the art world, was not just as an artist, but as a kind of like curatorial assistant, advisor, person to Massimiliano.
It's really unique to have the insight from someone who like has such a breadth of both making art and thinking about other people's art.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a thing that is both like distracting for me, but also has been like very useful. Like I always have been like I'm interested in my own art practice, obviously, but like I've always been interested in art sort of generally and also like cultural trends kind of broadly. And art has been a really like interesting and productive way for me to like analyze and think through culture and also to just like, I don't know, appreciate like the weirdness of other people's minds, which is like perhaps the most enjoyable thing about art in general.
Okay, Chris, tell me about the future now.
About the future. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that like continuing this sort of idea that like we're not in a correction in the art market, but we're in a
Yeah.
like a restructuring. I think, if I'm going to put on my predictor hat, which I will, I think that we are not going to see a return to the previous market structures. I think that we are, the art market has been doing this for a long time, but like I think increasingly is going to map the general economy, which is a sort of winner take all economy, where like, if you are an already successful gallery, i.e., the like big four or five, though I guess one of there are rumors that a very large blue chip gallery is about to go under, but I don't know if that's going to be something that is borne out. And of course, actually, yesterday, Marion Goodman died.
Yeah.
May she rest in peace, because she was like the
Yeah.
goat. And also was weirdly a sort of like place where I got my initial entree into the art world was through her gallery. So
Oh,
respect to her. But yeah, I think we're going to see an environment in which like established names, both gallerists and artists, are going to potentially continue to win. And unfortunately, like other artists down the ladder, it's going to be like harder and harder for them to get a toehold, sort of like financially and even career-wise. Which is not to say that like, people aren't going to continue to make some money and there aren't going to continue to be like art parties because people like love those. But I think that the model for an artist's career that sort of really got going in the 2010s or so with like zombie formalism, which is like artists being treated as like speculative assets and kind of like pumped and dumped over the course of like, if you're lucky, 5 years, but now it seems increasingly like 1 or 2 years, may be the model for the artist's career moving forward. That like people are just going to like flip artists' work like shit coins, or like penny stocks, and that will be like the financial life of an artist. I mean, that sounds like incredibly pessimistic, but I think like realistically, we're going to see that for the next like maybe 5 years as we transition to, and this is where I really talk about the future, as we transition to whatever the economy is going to be post AI.
right.
And yeah, and I will say like, of all of the things that I think about, like there's the joke of always saying like, oh, we live in these trying times, and the idea of like the polycrisis. Like
Polycrisis?
it's a way of referring to the like numerous interlocking crises that are sort of like plaguing the world, like the rise of right-wing authoritarianism, climate change, AI, economic sort of instability,
All the fun stuff.
all the fun stuff. I think that Adam Tooze, the great economist Adam Tooze, coined that term.
Okay.
But like in the sort of rainbow of the poly crisis, the crisis that I have become like hyper fixated on, which is a thing that I sort of like tend to do, recently, is just AI. Like I think that every other aspect of the crises of the polycrisis is going to play out in as a background for the sort of creation of strong artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
Uh, and that will change society in all manner of ways, but like I think it will, per our discussion, also change the art world like pretty.
Yes. And and I feel like you had some visions of what that would be like in the future.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing that I've been playing with as an idea recently is like, I don't know if this is catchy enough, but it's like the thing I have right now. But a kind of like universal folk art or universal basic folk art, I don't know,
Nice.
where like yeah, just sort of like,
The many,
trying to spin it off of like a universal basic income.
yeah, sorry, I had the other basic. It occurred to me in a kind of funny way.
I mean, it may also be that, like, as we were saying in our pre-chat, most art is bad,
Oh
but
yeah, I say that all the time.
I mean, that's just a true fact. But like, you know, it seems undeniable to me at this point that like we are going to experience a kind of like economic and social upheaval due to AI that is like unprecedented in its scope in like the course of human history. I think the likelihood that most jobs will be automated away by, say, like really an outside guess would be like 15 years, 10 years.
Hmm.
I think that like booting up robotics, I think is going to be like harder just because of like the manufacturing constraints. But like, the job that everybody said that like you should do if you wanted to be like a financially responsible, human person in the year 2012 or whatever, which was like you got
Hmm.
to learn to code. That's basically
Oh,
gone. Only the top level programmers are going to survive the round of layoffs that's going to happen in the next like 1 to 2 years. And then, on down, like if you've got a job that is a job you do on the computer, it likely will also get automated away. And
yeah.
so, like, in a world where that happens, where like we automate manufacturing, we automate online jobs, and we don't manage to like completely self-destruct and turn into like either like the apocalypse
Yeah. So
Terminator 2 type scenario or whatever, or
yeah,
like
this is a stable universal basic income future where
yeah,
people aren't killing each other. Okay, go.
if we enter a world, yes, of like fully automated luxury communism, which like maybe. I think that the role of art making is going to change like pretty dramatically. Insofar as like in said world, like everyone will have much more free time to do like whatever they want with it. And certainly many people will just like end up in a weird rabbit hole of like virtual reality and like video games and like AI sex bots or like whatever.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
I think a non-negligible number of people are going to, and this is where like this has been like a horribly pessimistic sort of rant, but like this sort of like optimistic tinge is I think that people are going to begin to like even more highly value the things that we consider like uniquely human, like the handmade, the imaginative, the kind of like fingers in the dirt type living, like farm to table restaurants, or like, these kinds of things that are now basically the semi-exclusive province of like the bourgeoisie or whatever, will become a sort of like more universalized in their access, and more potentially more valued because so many things will be done by machines.
I have to say, I don't know if it's scary, but not necessarily pessimistic. If are you saying there's a future in which there's less of a, the individual genius cult of art making is so important, and it's more important the like learning and practicing of crafts amongst all the people who now have a lot of free time?
100%. I think that this is the idea of like the universalization of folk art. I think one of the other things that's like structurally fucking with the art market at the moment is just this sort of like glut of artists. Like there are just so many artists.
And they all have to be the genius. to
And they
to
all, of
make the
course, want to
money.
be the genius. But this is sort of like a it's a thing that in I think like sociology is called elite overproduction. And um, it's true.
Subtitle of my podcast.
The free art school, elite overproduction. But that like in order to create this sort of like vaunted world of art that we like currently have as a model, where like, I don't know, how many artists have a solo show at the Whitney Museum of Art each year, like living artists? It's probably like four.
Yeah.
That's like, an economy of like relative scarcity, but that's being fed by this like incredible influx of artists and people who are getting MFAs and whatever. And
Ooh,
in this
yeah.
sort of post-scarcity economy, like even more people who are like fashion themselves a gentleman artist or whatever. And I think that that's an unsustainable, like the current model of, yes, the kind of like genius, grand narrative art history thing, which arguably, whatever, like maybe that died with postmodernism, but I think that's like kind of bullshit.
I
Um,
mean, it's yeah.
I think the idea that the idea that that is true is just not isn't just not accurate. But I think it will become true in this new world, and you will have a world in which like people will just make things kind of like for their friends or for their community. I mean, this is like in an ideal world, but like a universalization of kind of like folk art practice or craft. I think that actually like the idea of craft is going to like gain a lot in salience. Like there's this is not exactly a trend necessarily right now, but like things like the bad painting trend or like de-skilling in art, I think will be like not as compelling and like a kind of reskilling and a kind of like handmadeness will probably like increase in like relevance and salience at the time. I don't know. I mean, like these are all just like sort of wild speculations. I mean, not that wild, but I think it's a thing that like bears speculating on, especially if we're like thinking of this as an art school, um, and as a sort of resource for artists who are maybe just starting out or like considering becoming an artist. Because the landscape of art is always shifting. But I think the landscape of like art and the economy and everything is about to shift in a profoundly dramatic way that at least many people are not, I think, sufficiently mentally prepared for. I mean, I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for it either, but like
Yeah.
shit is about to get so wild, like so dramatically wild. And that,
Well, I also like find I could take a lot of hope in the possibility that as things change and maybe a lot of these jobs, imagine that people are still surviving and not having these jobs have become automated, is that creative people or artist personalities are usually born of trauma or something are like driven by passions. And I think that if people are suddenly have a lot of free time, their energies, if not focused into a passion, can be pretty destructive. So I think our creative people can add a lot of focus to this future, showing people like how to live a life with like extra time on your hands, make something, collaborate, be part of, get obsessed with making and not destroying.
yeah, totally. And I think actually even beyond that, something I haven't thought of until like really right now is that like, artists tend to even like artists who are like maybe they're not even really good artists, but like people who have an artistic character, I think are somehow like attuned to the micro shifts in like vibes more than maybe many other people. And I think it's very interesting to see, and I don't know if you've seen this trend in your friend group, but I certainly have in segments of mine of artists and art adjacent people moving into becoming therapists,
Well,
becoming like
that's just middle age.
shamans.
Oh yeah.
and like psychedelic medicine workers, whatever. But no, I mean, it's not, I actually don't think it's just like, oh, fuck, I've got to get a
Right.
job.
I'm being
Uh,
silly.
like, I think that there's a real prescience to that shift where perhaps some of the creativity that we're going to experience in a world post AI, post scarcity, whatever, will be one of like community building and experience sort of shaping. And not in terms of like, I don't, I mean, certainly we'll get a lot of like proliferations of like the Museum of Ice Cream or whatever. But like, I think also like tailor-made, perhaps like therapeutic style experience will take like precedence and salience from like just the sort of semi-alienated experience of like walking into a like chilly white cube gallery and like regarding a painting or whatever. That artists will become like weavers of community. And they will become kind of like, yeah, like architects of experience in ways that like artists in the 60s, like, this was the sort of like the idea behind like Capro's happenings or the sort of more like utopian stuff that like Joseph Beuys was saying about like everyone becoming an artist. Like these are the kinds of visions that I think could like come to fruition in this like new world. Wow, I'm sounding like way more optimistic than I anticipated
Oh,
sounding.
it's because it's me.
It sounds good, right?
You don't feel there's a bit of shaman practice in all art making? Like if you'd been born in a different time and place, you might have been the witch doctor.
I think it's a stretch to say all art making, um,
Hmm.
but I would say at its best, absolutely. Because like as we said, m most art is bad. Like not all art is good.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, but I'd say that in that any like like a brainstorming session, 95% of your ideas are going to be bad, but you need to do that to get to the 5% of the good. So I see all art as that same, and I don't mean to shit on art. I just mean a lot
I
of
don't
it
know.
is.
I mean, I think that's true, but I think that, like when you were saying that, I keep thinking of the comments that you often see online of like people being angry at AI making art. Which like there is a reason to be mad at AI making art, but like a comment I see like all the time, and I've written about AI art a little bit, so I knew this from experience, but
Mm.
also just generally being online is like AI will never create anything original. All AI does is metabolize all the art that came before it and then make an art out of that. And it was like, I'm not sure if you have ever been at an art gallery, but that is what a lot of artists are doing already. Like this, it's not just like every artist is sort of like pulling things out of the ether, out of nothing, and creating like a fully original, like wholly autonomous genius masterwork from the sky. Like, first of all, there's art history that people are trying to build off of, and second of all, those kinds of quasi shamanic jolts of inspiration or whatever are like both few and far between, and are not equally distributed amongst like the whole population of people trying to make art.
I don't mean bursts of shamanic. I mean the whole time.
Yeah, well,
Minus the emails.
I feel like it's overly romantic to say that because like I've met a lot of artists who don't have a shamanic bone in their body.
Okay, fine. I'm just
Um,
talking about myself. It's
but
obvious.
I think I think that's true of many artists.
Yeah. And I think in those terms because I've studied that kind of thing, both formally and informally, in my undergrad degree is religious
Right,
studies.
in
So
religious studies. And I would say like I've experientially studied at least some of
I
that.
know you have, or
And
heard.
I've heard tell.
Yeah.
Um, but at least, my like experiences in kind of shamanic adjacent, like medicine, psychedelic culture, which is a sort of like thing that's a side passion of mine. Like I've been around that world enough also to know that like claims of shamanism should be like held in the deepest with the deepest level of suspicion.
Yeah, true. All, yeah, yeah. From
But
study, yes, to asterisk later conversation
yeah,
about
right.
being aware of people who claim to have powers.
Yes. And I think, like one of the things that is obviously like perpetually compelling about like the figure of the artist, even if this, idea was supposedly dispelled with like the death of modernism or whatever, is this notion that they are kind of like magical beings who are in touch with some kind of they have like a direct line to whatever we would call like spirit or to genius, which was the genie is like a spirit. The spirit gives
Yeah,
the name to
genii, yeah.
that they are like have a privileged connection to this, and I think that is compelling, but it's like not always true. um
What do you think about like the historical like master craftsman that like that makes a school of an art form and is like a becomes like a guru of like dyeing or sculpting, whatnot, metalwork.
I mean, I think that's awesome.
Okay.
What do you mean? What do you think about that? Maybe even also like that kind of guild model maybe that you're talking about will become increasingly prominent. I think that like the way that they're structured now, the future of like sort of traditional colleges, but also like art schools is like a model that's like totally unsustainable. I mean, not for like various reasons, but not the least of which are just like it's just like so fucking expensive.
Yeah.
Like I wrote a whole article, which I don't know if I ever want to go back and read, but a whole article in like 2016 or something about this notion of like debt aesthetics, of like art aesthetics that were being driven specifically by the fact that like the artists who were making the art were profoundly in debt. And thus they were making like safer work that was like tailored to market dynamics, who were just trying to like get the like secure the bag, which like, respect. But absent this kind of like debt-based structure to the economy, yeah, I think we could see a return to like a guild structure in which like master crafts people, whether they're like, painters or metal workers or woodworkers or whatever, will
Yeah.
become a lot more. I mean, in some ways, like this is kind of what you're trying to set up here, right? Like a kind of free, cooperative community school.
Oh, yeah. Good question.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about something like the Bruce High Quality Foundation
Yeah.
back in the RIP.
Still
Uh,
functioning? No.
I I don't think so.
Yeah.
If it is still functioning, sorry, Bruce High Quality Foundation. But it's certainly less prominently functioning if it is
Sure.
going.
After I started this, I found there are different kind of iterations of this or type of project of making information available. Sometimes there's like a paid consulting part of it attached to them.
Yeah, Ajay Kurian is doing something like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
that's more explicitly like a school with
yeah,
educational format. I heard him give a talk
like
about it.
Brad Trammell does like studio visits as a sort of like
Ooh.
part of his podcast. Podcast, I don't know, vlog. Uh,
Oh,
uh, Joshua
yeah.
Citarella, who I just wrote a piece about for the New Yorker. He has a whole sort of like Discord based school called Do Not Research that has produced a lot of like interesting artists and thinkers, and which is totally free. I think you don't even have to like join his Patreon to be a part of it, but maybe. I mean, maybe if you do, it's like $5 a month, which like in the broad scheme of arts education is nothing. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like these alternative models are definitely something that is. Oh, Ariana Reigns is also, I think, still doing that. The poet. She had a sort of like a mystery school during the pandemic that I think still continues in some
Mm.
form. But yeah, I think like alternative forms of pedagogy, alternative forms of kind of like community making, care-based practice, I don't know, yeah, therapy, shamanism, like all of these things are like on the table in ways that I think maybe they're not at the moment, perhaps because everybody's like struggling over each other like crabs in a bucket to just like pay for health insurance, you know? And like I want to be clear, I am not super optimistic that we're going to get to this like post-scarcity utopian world. Like, definitely do not listen to Elon Musk when he says things like don't save for retirement. I mean, don't listen to him in general, but like that one, don't listen to. Um,
Yeah.
but like, I mean, I would listen more to the people who are like, you have 5 years to like, exit the permanent underclass. But if we're trying to like add a little like utopian sparkle to our otherwise like bleakly dystopian times.
Well, just it's so heavy these days. It's good to mix it up.
Yeah, right.
Find some.
Like at least find some like chink in the wall of like terror where like light can come in would be great. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's, hmm. I mean, I do try to keep the tone both supportive and positive here in explicit contrast to the majority of the rest of what's going on in media these days.
yeah, I mean, I hope I haven't like haven't sullied
No,
that optimism.
no. And au contraire. No, it's just good to like think a little bit, zoom out a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, like as somebody who like really has a fetish for systems thinking, like
Wow.
I like to yeah, prognosticate in that way.
It's another great title, Fetish for Systems
Fetish for
Thinking.
systems thinking. It's my new that's the title of my new show. But I wonder like what you know, I've been thinking about this recently in terms of like there's going to be a change in like the role of the artist. Like I wonder what do you think of the what do you think the role of the artist should be in society now or is?
For all the artists in society, good question. I mean, it's just
I
so
mean, it's also
funny.
like an obviously impossible question in some ways.
Yeah,
So
it's fine. I feel like it's such occupies a space of both weird amount of envy. Like people think you can just lay in bed all day and somehow receive an income, but then they don't trust you because that financial instability freaks them out. And they think if they know you too well, they'll get sucked into a world of instability.
like it's contagious somehow. Maybe it is contagious slightly.
Yeah, you'll unleash some like creative desires in them, and then they'll piss away everything that they have built to guard against chaos.
Yeah,
You'll like waste all their money or something. Uh, yeah, but then people also make meaning of their life completely by film, television, music, literature.
totally.
They bond with other people that way, but somehow don't see the spectrum from like, the gallery showing artist or art making thing, is seems to me to be part of a continuum which ends in the more like popular media.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw like an interview with David Hockney recently where he said something to the effect of like lots of people on their deathbed look back at their lives and wish they had been an artist, but no one looks back at their life and wishes they had been an accountant. I mean, no offense to the
Oh
accountants.
God. I saw that and I had a moment of like, I might be dying by a pool if I'd been an accountant.
No, right. I mean, I think like famous last words on the part of David Hockney, who was doing quite well,
Yeah.
was also the beneficiary of a sort of like economic world that we no longer live in. But also, you know, it's not William Carlos Williams, but who's the famously like the poet who spent his whole life as an accountant. I do not remember his,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, like you can have both. Um,
Yeah, and a lot of great artists had day jobs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking the other day, or talking the other day about Philip Glass and how long he remained a plumber, uh,
Oh, I didn't know.
and I think a cab driver too. But I think he stayed a plumber for like longer, which it does actually seem like the trades in general is like a good sort of like gap career for people who are like interested in working in the arts and like working with their hands. Because like probably the trades are going to be like one of the last things that are automated. I mean, famous last words, but like probably. And like maybe everyone can just be like Philip Glass, who I think, famously at some point when he was like right about to premiere, I think a piece at Lincoln Center, um, he ended up getting called to do a plumbing job for one of the critics of the New York Times who recognized him and was like, "Hey, aren't you the composer Philip Glass?" And he was like, "Yeah, I am, but like we can't really talk about this right now. Like I've got to focus on your plumbing, man." Um, and I feel
Yeah.
like that's like definitely a possibility. I mean, I feel like one of the things we're circling around in this
Mm.
conversation is like, should you go to art school? And I think the answer to that is like, I don't know, man. I wouldn't. Um,
They can be very expensive, and some of them are free for a
some of them are free.
master's program.
If
Even,
you get into Cooper Union, definitely go. But
yeah,
then again, you also have to still like live while you're fucking at Cooper Union. Um,
it was not like the idea of an undergraduate art school was not part of the mental landscape of my family background. Like that just
yeah,
was like going to Mars.
I mean, I didn't get an MFA. I got like a master's degree in something even more impractical,
Ooh.
um, architectural theory.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, I did. I studied with the now like quite famous sort of founding member of forensic architecture, E.L. Wiseman,
Hmm.
at Goldsmiths College in London.
Oh.
And like my weird and slightly arrogant like idea was like, oh, like I don't need to get an MFA. Like I've got this art making thing like down pat. The one thing I really need to get better at is theory, which didn't sound like the joke that it sounds like now at the time.
I
Um,
think there's a lot of different paths.
many different paths, but the you should probably get better at art theory path. I think we're done with that path now.
Yeah.
I think we've moved past that entirely. Unless like, I don't know, you're a grant getting artist in Europe. Um,
Hmm.
which
Oh, if only I could be.
if only. Um, we do not live in such a world of socialized culture. We live in the dog eat dog landscape of America.
Mm. Woof.
Yeah, woof woof is right. No, but I think it is an important question to sort of like ponder is art school worth it anymore?
It
Uh,
is a lot of
whatever,
money.
maybe, but like, is it worth it now? Like
Yeah.
I think that like obviously there's something to be said for like taking a period of X number of years to like allow your practice to kind of like gestate amongst a group of like a like-minded cohort, with supportive faculty who can like inspire you. Like at
I don't think you know what happens at MFA programs.
oh, it's like incredibly cutthroat and fucked up. Is that what you're saying?
It's something that even that makes it sound more romantic than the reality.
Yikes. I mean, like part of my impression is that like one of the big benefits of the MFA in general was to like form a community for you as an artist, right?
I
Like,
made a lot of really good friends.
yeah, well, but also friends who like presumably at some point have kind of like helped you with your career or something, right?
Very early on, one of them sent my work to a gallery he was working with, and those are the people that offered me my first show in New York. So yeah, very
Right.
concretely,
Totally.
yes.
And that's like the MFA like working as it's supposed to in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. Like I feel like for whatever you're paying for an MFA now, like 200 that like 150.
Oof.
I don't know. I don't know.
Oof. Yeah, and then
I feel kind of like the boomer, like the meme of the like rich lady in Arrested Development being like, "What could a banana cost, Michael? $10?" But like whatever you're paying for your outrageously expensive MFA program.
I
Uh,
think I want to talk to someone who has done that. I think that in the future, I'd like to interview somebody and ask them about that experience of paying like 100 grand for an MFA.
yeah, and specifically like going into debt for it and like was that
Yeah. Yeah. This is a
um
put a call out there.
yeah, it just like the value proposition is like so not a thing that seems valuable at this point where like I don't know, a lot of artists nowadays get famous on social media. Like maybe just like get better at Instagram or something, which is like horrible. Like I don't want to get better at Instagram, but like, that's where like everybody's fucking stuck addicted to their phones, including all the collectors. So
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know. Or, like seek out alternative forms of education and, I don't know, like get a trade job or I don't like the advice, like I feel like sort of hearkening back to our like AI discussion, I feel like any advice that I would or anyone would really give a young person now about like what career to pursue risks sounding like a totally out of touch, like fucking boomer.
Well, I actually don't want to give advice to people. I'm curious about what advice, if there was advice in your own life that was helpful and sort of like mapping how that might have affected you. But like open-ended giving advice in general, I try to steer away from because it's so, it's not going to fit anybody necessarily, and it drives me fucking up the wall to be told what to do, honestly.
I mean, I'm certainly not trying to tell anybody what to do.
No, I'm just curious, like if there, well, on this topic has there been any like piece of wisdom that you got specifically that was meaningful to you and your trajectory?
I don't know if I can think of a specific piece of wisdom that I received
Hmm.
just off the top of my head.
Sure.
But there is a piece of, I think, wisdom that I tend to try and pass on to like students when I teach, which again, in the economic landscape we're living in these trying times, hashtag whatever, is maybe easier said than done. But like the advice I give a lot of people is like hang out. Like if you're a young artist, if you're a young creative person, like in addition to working in your studio and like working your day job, like it is really important to like meet other artists who maybe you didn't just go to an MFA program with, and like forge bonds in person, which I feel like is a thing that is less of a thing that people do now. Like, notoriously people aren't going out anymore and people aren't drinking alcohol and whatever.
Oh,
And maybe, the bonds that people are forming are bonds online, but like form bonds with like a community of like-minded people, because those people are going to be the people that will like help you later in life, who you'll be connected with, potentially for like decades down the line. And like, you know, am I going to lots of openings now? Not really, because I like live in the middle of the woods in upstate New York for the most part. But like, I went to openings all the time when I was younger and like meeting people and being in that churn, if you're privileged enough to be able to live in like a major metropolitan area that has an art scene, which of course like many people aren't, um, but like it is worth it to go out and it is worth it to like try and meet people.
it's a highly social, like, way of life. You're sharing
Yeah,
ideas and getting feedback from people you trust can be so valuable. It's like oh gosh, that's like the real diamonds of the whole thing. It's like you have a good relationship with a friend who's a creative and you show them your work and they say this thing that even telling them, the act of telling them about your project will crystallize something in your mind, and then they'll have one bit of insight to someone you trust, which I again stress, someone who
totally.
you value. That can,
No, and I
that's
think
like that's like the best feeling of one of the top three reasons to be doing this.
absolutely. And I think that like people who like talking with other creative people is like those are the people who are going to give you the best insights and advice because they're the people who know what it's like to try and be creative. Like your gallerist is probably not going to give you great, like they might give you good career advice, but like I don't know if you should be taking advice from your gallerist on like what art to make.
Oh yeah, I feel like that's like that Basquiat movie gives people some like fantasy about the art dealer is going to mentor you or something.
Right. I mean, it certainly is possible. I'm not saying that there aren't like incredible art dealers who are like doing like God's work, but I feel like actually one of my like like superpowers as like an art critic is that I also have made art. And I have a better sense having made art what it might be like to be the artist that I'm writing about.
Hmm.
Which is always kind of the question that I have for myself when I'm thinking about work, when I'm thinking about writing about work, is like, if I was this artist, like what would my life be like? What is my thought process? What is like how does this, practice sort of like function for them? Which is also why like I really like when I'm writing about somebody, I try to talk to them and get a sense of about their work from them. Because they are, despite the fact that, like, yes, of course, like interpretation is variable and like ever changing in the minds of the people who are viewing the artwork and whatever, but like it is pretty important to like go to the horse's mouth, if you will, and like get a sense of the artist like from the artist. And, like artists are not always the most articulate about their own work, which is why I don't do like a ton of like strict interviews. But I find like if you talk to somebody long enough, like they will have insight about like just like what you were saying, you can catalyze their insight into their own work, perhaps in ways they'd never even thought about.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
which is great and is very rewarding, I will say.
Whenever I see giant paintings, I think, wow, you must have had a freight elevator.
That is definitely true. That is
Hmm.
definitely true.
Ground level suburban space where you truck them right out.
You had a parent in Hollywood. Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
you
Hey,
had a,
should we
you have a parent with like blue text in Wikipedia. Um,
oh, yeah. I mean, just had that just it came seeing an Alex Katz giant painting. I was like, "Oh yeah, big studio doors."
real big.
Because I had once maxed out the frame size at a framer because of the size of their freight elevator. They're like, we can get a 48 by 9
Sure.
foot.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'll
No,
take it.
it's like it's interesting to think like the logistics of art making are a thing that like not a lot of people think like the nitty gritty logistics like
Yeah.
that like obviously people are like ooh you're a great painter like you've done a good job rendering this object or whatever like the craft elements are things that people think about but like the constraints that one has to work with like financially spatially like logistically in general
Your own
uh
body, the limits of your own body,
yeah.
various varying physical abilities.
I mean, why is it that we think that like the only art that seems to be being shown right now is painting? Um,
Oh, because money.
yeah, no, of course, but
It
it's also
lasts.
logistics. It's easier to ship it. It's easier to store it. You get more bang for your buck. And
Hmm.
also, like, unlike, say, photography, which, as we both know, is outrageously expensive to produce. If you have a dealer who is like generous enough to actually fund your production, which many people don't, but if you did, like funding painting or whatever is like significantly less of a capital expenditure on the part of the dealer than paying for framing a show of photographs or whatever.
Yeah, framing photographs is something, we have both dealt with. That's like thousands of dollars to do a proper show, essentially.
Yeah.
And then paintings, you just put up some nails, pop, 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 pop. It's on the
I'm
wall.
gonna make painters mad about this. I'm sure they're gonna be
I
like,
know.
"Have you seen
Oh,
the
I
cost of oil paint?" Uh,
Everybody thinks the grass is greener and that.
no, but I think it legit is. Like there is no, I think like worse art in terms of ratio of like expense to make it and like price point that you can reasonably sell it at than photography at this moment. Um,
You know what they say. How do you make a little money in photography?
start with a lot of money. Correct. Correct. Yeah, that's harsh, but it is definitely true. Like every everything that we like for those listeners or watchers who don't know this, like for everything that I've said about the art market broadly, just like multiply that by 10 for like the photography market.
Yeah, move the decimal point over.
Yeah. Uh,
Hey, let's end on something pause,
yeah,
as Leos should.
as we should. I mean, I think that the positive note that I would want to end on is like I think that we all should be looking in the face of the polycrisis and this sort of like upheaval that like potentially we're looking down the barrel of with AI and everything, fascism, that we should all be looking to foster human values, like the values maybe of humanism, but like human community, the handmade, the face-to-face, the relational, the off-screen, the tactile, the
Uh-huh.
erotic, the haptic,
Dancing.
the the dancey, the embodied, I think maybe is what we're also saying. You know, and like whatever, I'm not a fucking saint. Like I'm as guilty as anybody of scrolling endlessly on social media, but like one should, looking forward to the future, try and like foster these kinds of connections and this kind of like value structure. Yeah. I mean, like one of my favorite podcast Team Human, which he doesn't really do all that much anymore, but like occasionally it comes up. But his idea is that we should play on Team Human rather on Team whatever else you could be playing on. Team Robot,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
Team AI. But yeah, I'm praying for Team Human, and we all should, I think.
Yeah.
That's as optimistic as I get.
Oh, okay, cool.
I don't know.
Well,
And yeah, I mean, and like in, you know, I don't know, make beauty and be weird. I think like making like the best art I think always is made by the like strangest and most singular people. Um and like we should as a collective like foster the creativity and existence of strange and singular people.
oh, agree.
Yeah,
Agree.
I mean, you know, like one could get taken to task for being like too individualistic or like whatever in that regard. But I really do believe in the sort of like singular vision of like of artists and the ability for their like subjectivity to shine forth in their work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, feel like it's, I'm sorry not to dive into a whole other thing, but it's sort of like, I feel like real art people or creative people, they kind of sit with one foot in and one foot out, trying to like make dematerial things material or visible or hearable,
Mm.
articulate the hard to articulate.
Yeah. I mean,
Like you were saying that that your creative people are perceptive of like, spidey sense wise of changes, cultural changes.
yeah, and I think that like the most interesting type of work is not work that necessarily like, I don't know, diagnoses the present, but perhaps like prognosticates the future, you know, and like especially like you should be making work or one should be fostering the sort of creation of work that is mysterious, that can't be sort of like dispelled or neutered by like an explanatory wall text or whatever. Like the worst type of artwork on earth is the work that you look at and you're like, huh, what is this? And then you go over and like look at the wall text and you're like, oh yeah, huh. I guess they did do that. You know, it should be like art making should be more of like an open-ended question than an answer. I think
Yeah.
I think that's the note of optimism that I'll end on.
Ah, great. Okay, thank you. And it is such a pleasure to read your writing about artwork and to see your artwork. Like you're an astonishingly verbally articulate person who also makes visual art, it's a really rare combination, and I appreciate you lending that to this project. Bye,
Thank you
Chris.
so much. It's been a pleasure.